Good day, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Live with Kevin, another episode eventually of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. But I'm happy to be with you live from Indianapolis on a Monday at noon my time, and so glad to be with you. If you're with us for the first time, welcome. If you've been here before, you probably know what I'm about to say. I want you to go to wherever you can comment, whatever social platform you're on, and say hello. Tell us where you're located. There's a couple reasons why I want you to do that. One is I want you to be engaged with us, but secondly, I'd like you to know where you're located. And thirdly, if that's a word, I want you to get used to using your fingers on the keyboard for the next little while, because I'm hoping during this live conversation that you join us with your comments and your thoughts and your ideas. Just imagine that you were joining my guest and I around a table for a cup of coffee. If you had a question, you'd ask it, right? If you had a comment, you would share it. If you had an idea, you would offer it. So do that here too. It'll be a better conversation. It'll be more interesting. You might get a specific question answered, and eventually it'll be a better episode of our podcast. You see that up over this shoulder, that this, if you didn't know, will eventually be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Now, all the stuff that I'm about to say, that I've just said, won't be on that podcast. It was just for you that are live or watching this later. But I have one other announcement to make that I will probably make during the podcast itself as well. I just found out this morning that my next book is now available on Amazon. Yes, it is. Flexible Leadership is the title. This is the first time I'm announcing it anywhere. I'm going to tell you where you can go right now to get a copy. You can go to remarkablepodcast.com/flexible to see that Amazon page and order your copy. If you might be one of the very first people to order it. If you go to remarkablepodcast.com/flexible, you can get your copy. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to transition us to the podcast. And so what I'm about to do is the break for Marissa, so she knows. Marissa, this is for you in 3, 2, 1. Before we get to skill set comes mindset. Now, we all have mindsets. The question is, do the ones you have serve you or not? Today, we're going to talk about having an unstoppable mindset. And my guest is someone who's highly qualified to talk about that topic. And I'm excited to share the conversation and introduce him to you. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we're helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively, yes, and to make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could join us in the future live, and do that on your favorite social media channel to learn when we're doing those, how that's happening, and how you can get connected to those. You can join either our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Those aren't the only places we do those, but if you go to those two places, you can find out when they're happening and how you can get connected. You can do that by going to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by my new book. Doesn't come out till next March, but you could be among the first to have a copy by going to remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. Why is that the link? Well, because the book is called Flexible Leadership. I'm super excited to share it with the world, and you can be among the first to have a copy by going to remarkablepodcast.com/flexible and pre-ordering your copy today. Our guest today, I'm going to bring him in now, and then I'm going to introduce him, and we're going to get started. I see there have been some comments. I'll put those up in a second. My guest today is Alden Mills, is a 3-time Navy SEAL platoon commander and an Inc. 500 CEO, founder and CEO. He is also the author of 3 books, the latest of which is Unstoppable Mindset, How to Use What You Have to Get What You Want. He is our guest. I'm excited to have him. Alden, thanks for being here.
It is such a treat to be here, Kevin. Thank you.
And so we've got people from Boston, and we got people from Colorado, and we've got other people saying hello. Hi, Damon. How are you, sir? We have other people saying hello. And so we're glad all of you are here. You know what that means, Alden? Those people were listening. when I said that. So I want us to dive in. And I often ask people a question about their journey. And there's a little bit about your journey in that short introduction. But I want to ask you a specific question because you talk early in the book about one of your goals was to write a best-selling book. And obviously you've been an entrepreneur. You've been a Navy SEAL. Thank you for your service. And yet at some point you decided that writing books and specifically having a bestseller or bestsellers was your goal. I'm curious, with that background, what's the journey that leads you to say, hey, I want to write books?
The journey started with the idea that I wanted to invent a product and bring it to market. I really wanted that journey. I started sketching out products when I was still a SEAL platoon commander on submarines because we were spending a lot of time on submarines. And through that journey, I did have that opportunity, brought a lot of different products to market, security products, fitness products, and most known for things like the perfect push-up and the perfect ab carver. But then along the way, I started to realize it really wasn't so much, and I was very into fitness, that it was one thing to help people with biceps and triceps, but it's an entirely different thing to help them with this muscle in between their ears. And once I made that switch, the creativity that went into writing a book and the persistence required, because I have to be honest, I do not feel like I'm a writer. I'm much more the storyteller. I need those editors out there. But I wanted to have a legacy, to leave something for my boys. And that was the impetus. And the trigger event of that was one of my good friends was the first Navy SEAL to die in Afghanistan. And when he did, I knew there was a letter going to an 18-month-old son. And that letter is called a just in case letter. You have to write one when you go off on every set of missions. I had written 3 of them, but they were to my mom, my dad, and my brother. And when that happened, my wife was pregnant with our first child. And I thought, all right, I'll write a letter to my unborn son. And that letter led to the next letter, led to the next letter, led to the 4th letter. I have 4 boys now. And that became the first book.
It did. And then after that, you wrote Unstoppable Teams before this book, Unstoppable Mindset. I'm curious, that gives us the genesis of the first, but I'm curious about the progression. So you went from talking about teams now to talking about mindset. And I'm just curious, tell us a little bit more about that progression.
So in much the same way that you look at remarkable leadership, I think of leadership in these 3 levels of leadership. And the best analogy I give it is if I was dropping a pebble in a reflection pond, and that pebble is your action that agitates the water and creates the 3 ripples, right? Let's think of it as 3 concentric circles that build on each other. The first ripple is you and how you lead yourself. The second one then builds to team leadership. A team is nothing more than a reflection of its leader. And then the final ripple is really the organization, the team of teams, the culture that's involved in scaling something that leaves your legacy. And that is the largest ripple, right? So they build on each other, leading yourself, leading teams, leading organizations.
I'm smiling because I've recently, in the new book, Flexible Leadership, I use that metaphor. I talked about that metaphor, but I also use that in a recent webinar that I created, and I really love that metaphor. That's why I was smiling. And so there's that. I want to ask you a question specifically from the book, and I told you at the front that I was going to do everything I could to make this useful and helpful for you. So I'm not going to ask you to tell me what's on page 9. I'm going to read it to you because I want to read.
We're not doing that.
Well, here's what I know. I've read this book way more recently than you have.
Yeah.
So, but I want to read you a line from page 9. And then it's in the introduction, and then I just like you to comment, say whatever you want to say about it, because if there's one thing that I remember from this book and our conversation. This will be one of them. Here it is. Safe is not what we are meant to be. We are built for struggle. Struggle makes us stronger. It helps us move forward. I think of struggle like friction. Without friction, we cannot advance. Talk about that for a second.
My life, if you were to look at every one of the successes I've had, there's probably been at least 5 to 10 failures behind each one, at a minimum. I mean, here's a kid born in central Massachusetts, told that he had smaller than sized lungs, asthmatic, wasn't good at ball sports, was, persistence and the idea of the struggle gave me gave me the gift of whatever it was I was trying to accomplish. But that gift didn't come unlocked. It's almost as if, and this is what I firmly believe, we all have unique talents, unique gifts, but they are like a raw mineral. They're like a raw diamond, right? They're rough and they're not polished and they're not shiny and reflective. They're like this hunk of raw talent, and it needs the friction of polishing, of pushing you beyond what you originally thought was possible to prove yourself and to those around you, like, I can do this. That gives us that advancement, that progression. But we have to get that. Just like working out in a gym. You're not going to get muscles if you don't have resistance.
Yeah. So let's tie that. I'm confident people can make this connection, but I want to hear your connection from that idea to the idea of mindset. I mean, what you just described is a mindset, but take us into that a little bit further. This idea of struggle as valuable and how you would connect that to mindset.
Right. Okay. So here we are, and we're thinking about doing something we have never done before, right? I wrote this book. If you go to the very beginning of that introduction, I wrote this book for everybody who's considering doing something they've never done before. That's who this book is intended for, because it's scary out there. You're going into the unknown. And one of the metaphors I use in chapter 1 is that we're all like captains of our own boat. And there's this moment where we decide we have to leave the safe harbor of what I consider the comfort zone, right? We get comfortable in some place and we're looking out past the harbor and we see this edge of the horizon. It's as far as we can see. And when we get to that edge and you get there and you lose sight of land, you're now in the unknown. There is this distinction between going from known to unknown. And that's the point where we step in to our leadership, to be our remarkable leader, in your words, to get through the unknown. And when you get into that unknown, we have to understand things aren't going to go well. We are going to struggle. We're going to get pushed back by the wind and the waves. We might even get shipwrecked a few times or run into sandbars. You take a little ship metaphor. But it's out there that we must remind ourselves that the struggle is a good thing. And that as long as we keep getting up and learning from what we're doing and use the tools that I offer in the book, we will progress beyond these 3 main mindset obstacles that a lot of people get tripped up on. And those obstacles are,
I was just going to say, why don't you go ahead and tell people now?
Starting, failing, and tiring, right? Those are the 3 main chunks of when we're out doing something new to us. Because when we're doing something new to us and trying to achieve something we've never done before, we have to be doing some new things. Yeah. And that's uncomfortable. And we've got to get comfortable understanding that it's okay that we're going to have setbacks. And actually those setbacks are moments. And if I can get people to start thinking of the obstacle as the opportunity, as the possibilities in the problem, the advantages of your adversity, then we are flipping into what I call the realm of being an unstoppable mindset.
So you've hinted at it already, and obviously this is the Remarkable Leadership podcast. So there's no way we can foster these mindsets in others if we don't have them. Like, very difficult for that to happen. Certainly with any sustainability, right? So my question then is, how do we, beyond having our mindset being unstoppable, what advice do you have about helping to transfer that to others in our role as a leader?
Well, the number one thing that I always start with, whether I'm leading a current team, I'm taking over a new team, or I'm coaching an executive or a senior leadership team, the first thing I always do is say, okay, let's fill out some goals. Just give me two personal, two professional, start with 10 years, and then give me 3, and then give me 1. I always want to start with the longest one first. If you don't like 10 years, pick 5, or pick 20. But I want that 10. The reason I say 10 is I want something way past the horizon. I want to understand the person I'm working with. Where's your imagination right now? And you'll be surprised. For some folks, that 10-year goal is actually not that far out. It may be more like a 3-year goal. They have a preconceived limit of what is possible for them.
Right.
That's okay. There's no judgment on that, but I want them to put it out there. I want them to understand, and I want to hear to them what's over the metaphorical horizon for them. Okay?
I really want, before you go on, I just want to comment on that idea of no judgment, because if we as a leader are asking our team to do those, to write and share these goals, they're theirs, right? And the worst thing, one of the worst things we could do is, and you say, oh man, that isn't 10 years. That's going to just take you a year and a half. What do you think? Like, even if that means that you see them in a very positive vein, we've got to keep the judgment out of that. So please
Totally
continue,
agree.
but I just wanted to, underline that point for everybody.
Totally agree. Actually, what I'm saying to myself, when somebody comes up with a goal that's only being done in a year and a half, might be done while we're still working together, I'm thinking to myself, yes, they are going to get confident so quickly because I'm going to help them achieve that goal. Now, on this, and these sound like nuances, but they're important. Always start with a long-term one first. I don't want to do a goal that starts from the base and builds up. If you do it that way, I have discovered over the last 25 years of goal setting that they'll typically build a hypothetical that will say, well, if I can do this and I can do this, and if I can do this, I'm going to do this. And the hypothetical actually shortchanges you. You want to go to what your dream is. Like, just dream with reckless abandon. Tell me what you're doing without constraints. And I want to see what those constraints are, because they'll come up. Number 2, I always ask for the personal ones first, not the professional ones. And I do that reason first and foremost because I want them to understand I'm concerned about the whole leadership person, right? There isn't, no, it seems like a nice little Chinese firewall, like, okay, well, I have work and I have personal. No, it's all of the same. And in today's world, you must be thinking about the entire person. And if I can help them personally, and odds are, if I can't, know somebody that might be able to help them with one of their goals of learning Mandarin, or want to become a better at watercolor, or learn the piano, or live overseas, whatever their personal goal could be. And when you get invested like that, you're connecting with them emotionally. They're expecting the professional. Oh, well, I'd like the ROI to be like this, and I'd like
Right.
to get that number, right?
So I want to dive into the deep end of one of the areas you talked about in the book about mindset, and I think it's an area that I guess I could probably even say societally is a challenge, maybe now more than ever.
Yeah.
It certainly is a challenge for leaders, and that is focus. And you
Mm,
talk about 5 focus actions. We probably don't have time to unpack them all, but why don't
mm.
you pick a couple of those that you think are especially uh, important for us as leaders?
Yeah. Well, let's do. First of all, I love acronyms. Okay.
Hey, you and I like acronyms, and we like alliteration. Like I
Yeah.
have
Oh,
noticed that.
100%.
I love
Because we want memory aids, right, Kevin? I mean,
100%.
at the end of the day, if you can't remember what we're talking about and offering, then you're not going to be able to practice it. And you have to be able to practice it. Got to be able to remember it. So the chapter on focus, the acronym is FOCUS, FOCUS. And let's talk about the first two, F and O. To understand focus in my book is to understand how focus works. Focus, I call it, acts like a funnel. We have a focus funnel. We all have it. It focuses energy into us taking an action. Now, what powers focus? What goes in the focus funnel? They're thoughts, right? The
Yep.
thoughts that are generated inside our beautiful little brains. And we have all kinds of thoughts. And there are positive thoughts and there are negative thoughts. There are all kinds of different thoughts, but they're categorized in 3 main areas: past, present, and future. Let me give you an example of what happens when we focus on a past negative thought. If we focus on that, we'll get more and more, and it will get us eventually depressed. If we focus on a past future, so if we focus on a future negative thought and we keep doing that, well, that creates a hypothetical of anxiousness. Now, the flip can occur if we focus on something we did in the past that was positive. Well, that will give us confidence. And if we focus on something in the future, that will give us hope that's positive, right? But here's the most important piece: none of these thoughts are helpful or hurtful to us until we put it in the focus funnel and attach energy to the thought. Otherwise, they're just like clouds flipping by our head, floating by all day long.
Like all of the other thoughts, right?
Like all the other thoughts, good, bad, or indifferent. And there's a few pictures in the book. And one of those pictures has to do with all these thoughts going by the top of your focus funnel. And this is the F of the focus funnel. And I'd like everybody to think of it like an adaptive screen, right? That sits over there. You can open it and you can close it. This, folks, is a leadership decision, your leadership decision. It's how you lead yourself, how you decide what thought is going to go inside that focus funnel. That's the very first major leadership decision you're doing. And the key here is, and I know we're all mess it up at first. I mess it up all the time. And I want everyone to understand something. We are human. That means we are imperfect. That means we're going to make mistakes, which is why there's leadership in the first place, because we've got to lead from each other and learn from each other. So when we make this decision to put a thought going into the focus funnel, you are filtering thoughts. Okay. And I want you to think of that. This is an active filtering process as you start your day, as you go throughout your day. Is this thought helpful or hurtful to what I am trying to get accomplished today and 10 years now from that goal that I have said I've committed to? That's part one. That's called filtering. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 is owning your outcome. It's understanding these outcomes that of an action you are taking. Now, remember, we tied everything back to the goals. Goals start actually in chapter 1 of the book. Focus is about, you probably know better than I do, I think it's chapter 5. And um, And in that, one of the most important things, so first of all, I was dealing with starting because filtering has a lot to do with starting your initiative. The next piece has to do when you failed a couple of times and you're frustrated. You're like, I don't know if I can keep going or if this is going to work. This is where owning the outcome is really important. And I offer everybody this exercise called outcome accounts. And an outcome account is nothing more than drawing like a large T. Now, I made up this metaphor from my graduate's class in accounting, which was by far my worst class ever. Accounting was very hard for me, but I remembered the T account. Okay. So I want you to think of a large capital T. You've got your goal that you write on top. This is all explained in the book, by the way. There's a plus and a minus, right? Credits and debits. I want you to think of it like that. And let's start with the plus side. 1, what's the desired outcome? 2, who does it impact? 3, how does it make you feel? Okay, so now you're imagining for a moment and things aren't going well. And you're like, well, wait a second. What if I do this again and it gets the desired outcome that I'm looking for that's going to help me to get to the 10-year goal, the 3-year goal, the 1-year goal? What happens if you achieve that goal? If you achieve the goal of creating a business that you're finally independent and you can serve up your family and enable yourself to travel the world and go do amazing things with other people? Who does it impact? And start with the people you love most. And then how's that make you feel? And I want you to envision that. And by the way, we go a little deeper into that and we talk about outcome movies and things like that. And then you do the opposite and then say, okay, I failed. I gave up. I quit. I didn't accomplish this. Who does that impact and how does that make me feel? Okay, that's the O of focus, right? First we did filter and then we did own your outcomes. And when you use the outcome account in the beginning, it will feel a little mechanical. You're writing it out and you're like this and this. But then after a while, you can be like, oh, I got this. I can do it in my head. I mean, I was doing it in my head. I didn't even know I was doing it in my head when I was going through SEAL training, wondering, should I quit today? Is this too hard? And then I did it again when we were launching the perfect push-up and looking at bankruptcy for the first time, and then the second time, and then the third time. And each one of those times, I found energy in the future hope of what I wanted to live my life in, what I envisioned. Okay, I'm off my soapbox.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I figured you'd get on one, and I gave you space to do that, which is perfect.
You did. You're getting me going here, Kevin.
So there's a lot of stuff in this book, and we are talking with Alden Mills. If you've just joined us, the author of his newest book, The Unstoppable Mindset, how to use what you have to get what you want. And so there's 100 things we could have talked about, we didn't talk about. But is there anything specifically that you hoped I would have asked that I didn't?
Well, first I want to tell you, I thought you nailed some of the things right out. I was very impressed. We went right at it. Probably the one thing I would say is, hey, Alden, tell us about the 3 controllables. Like what really makes mindset? And Alden, you turn mindset from a noun into a verb relatively, right? Yeah. We talk about mind setting. And I really want people to think of mindset as an active form of taking action daily. It's not like, oh, I got it. It's not a destination, right? We're mind setting all the time. Carol Dweck ages ago brought up the idea between fixed and growth mindset. I really want to build upon that and talk about the active process of looking at an obstacle as an opportunity, dealing with those problems as possibilities, right? And to do that, I really defined what it takes to have our 3 controllables. And it really boils down to our thoughts, our focus, and our beliefs and how they work in what I call a mindset loop. And when we understand and where we're entering, because we have to own all 3 of those pieces, that's first level leadership. because how you do that will be how you can help others when they're stuck. And by the way, they'll return the favor because there'll be times when you'll get stuck because that is part of the process of leaving the safe harbor.
Absolutely. The only thing you knew I was going to ask you is this next question.
Yeah.
What are you reading these days?
The current book I'm reading is called Agency, and it's by Ian Rowe. And he's a phenomenal individual who has really created a new curriculum for kids in charter schools. And here's a surprise, he has an acronym. And the acronym is called FREE. And he's really trying to address leadership at young ages. Like we're talking about 10, 11-year-old inner city kids, no parents, up on the street, and turning these kids around and starting to understand their strength and the gifts they have. And I find I'm in awe of what he's doing. And I think that in some ways is he's teaching these kids to be unstoppable.
I love that. The book is Agency. We'll have that in the show notes. You can obviously find that wherever fine books are sold. But there's another book that you can find, and it's the one that we've been talking about for the last little bit. I'm going to hold it up again for those who are watching. Alden, tell people where they can. Where do you want to send them? How do you want to be connected to them? Where do you want to point people in relationship to the book or any of your work?
Well, the obvious places where you can find the book are on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, but Indie bookstores carry them. And if they aren't, you can walk right in there and they should be able to get it to you within 48 hours. But you'll also see lots of reviews on Amazon. And if you get the book, I appreciate a review. Anybody who's ever known anything about writing books know how important it is and what it feels for an author to get an authentic review of what was helpful for you.
And if they want to learn more about the rest of your work,
Alden-mills.com. I have a monthly newsletter free along with a series of leadership posts that will come out every 2 weeks. And I'm always working on those 3 levels of leadership: leading yourself, leading teams, and leading organizations.
I love that. And before we go, thank you obviously for being here, Alden. But before we finish up, I have a question that I need to ask everyone who's watching and listening. I ask it every single episode. It's simple. Now what? Well, the question is simple, but the action is critical. Like, what action will you take? Alden was saying that thinking about mindset as a verb. What are we going to do? How do we continue to create, sustain, reinforce that mindset? The same goes here. What is it that you got from the last 30 minutes or so that you will do something with? Because otherwise it was just entertainment. While that might be useful, it's not nearly as useful as the action will create for you when you choose that, whatever that might be. Maybe you got something about the 3 obstacles or the 3 controllables, or the conversation that we had about the filter, how we filter our thoughts. I don't know what it is that caught you, that stopped you, that perhaps if you're listening to this later, you paused for a second, listen to your intuition, listen to your reaction, listen to your resistance from the last 30 minutes and say, what am I going to do with this? Because until you do that, nothing will really change. Alden, thanks so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to have you. I've been looking forward to this ever since I got the book, and I'm glad that we had the chance to have the conversation.
Such an honor, Kevin. Keep doing what you're doing. You inspire me and a lot of other people. Love it.
So everybody, if you even haven't a little bit of agreement with Alden on that point, you should come back next week, because we'll be here next week on the podcast, and actually later this week if you're with us live, for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.